This channel is part of the History Hit network.
"500 years ago, England was emerging into a new era. After years of war, plague, and famine, the kingdom was enjoying peace and prosperity under the reign of the first Tudor king, Henry VII. A new class of business-savvy farmer was thriving, boosting food production.
And then over she goes.
While wool from their sheep was generating half the nation's wealth. Many of the nation's farms were under the control of the biggest landowner in England after the king, the monasteries. Their influence could be felt in every aspect of daily life. They were not just places of religion. They were at the forefront of technology, education, and farming. But with the daily lives of monks devoted to prayer, they depended increasingly on tenant farmers who worked and tended their lands.
Steady, girl.
Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to Tudor England, here at Weald Downland in West Sussex, to work as ordinary farmers under the watchful eye of a monastic landlord.
Here.
That's the way. Nice.
To succeed, they'll have to master long-lost farming methods.
Watch those flanks. They're going again.
And get to grips with Tudor technology.
Quite noisy.
It's a really violent process.
While immersing themselves in the beliefs, customs, and rituals that shaped the age.
This is merry England, for heaven's sake, so to speak. Let's enjoy it.
This is the untold story of the monastic farms of Tudor England. Ruth, Tom, and Peter are travelling to their new farm at Weald Downland in Sussex on England's south coast. In 1500, England was 15 years into the rule of its first Tudor king, Henry VII. The previous 2 centuries had seen the country ravaged by war, economic depression, and plague. The Black Death had cut England's population from 4 million to just 2.5 million. But under the new Tudor dynasty, the nation was slowly emerging from the darkest of times.
This is our marketplace. This is our little town.
What a day to start out on, eh? Look at it, blue
Welcome
sky.
to Tudor England, eh?
The early Tudor world is a Catholic world, suffused with religious thought, even very practical stuff. It was always there. Whatever you did, whatever you talked about, whatever you thought, there was no other system of understanding the world. It was undisputed.
In 1500, monasteries were almost as powerful as the state itself. They exerted their influence over the entire population, not only in matters of religion, but in every aspect of daily life. This was a God-fearing nation. People believed they risked eternal damnation, even social isolation, if they didn't attend church at least once a week.
In this period, most people were living in small wooden structures, and the focal points of these communities were these massive cathedrals, awe-inspiring stone built, dominating the landscape. And this shows how central the church and religion were to people's everyday lives.
It was a time when religion, rather than science, was relied upon to explain everything, from the weather and the growth of crops to health and well-being.
Our lives, this country, the values we have, the laws we have, the way we approach life, it's all shaped by the past. I mean, this is one of those periods that really forges the identity of England.
Professor James Clark, an expert in medieval monastic life, is introducing them to their new farm.
What was the relationship between monasteries and farms such as this? By the early Tudor period, monasteries are preferring increasingly to put out a large proportion of their agricultural property to tenants.
So we're not employed directly by the monasteries, but rather a sort of little private enterprise paying rent to the monasteries, and we're taking all the business risks.
Absolutely so, and it's down to your ingenuity and perhaps your ability to read the dynamics of the market to make a success of it.
As well as having a good head for business, monastic farmers needed shelter, not just for themselves, but also to accommodate and feed their workers.
It's huge.
Heating bill's going to be a bugger, isn't it? Wow.
This is a house. Wow.
How many people would have lived in here?
There would be the tenants and their immediate family, but there would also be live-in domestic servants, so maybe 8 to 10 people in total.
This was the heart of the house, where the farmers would eat, carry out business, and house extra labourers at harvest time.
Wow, so where do we sleep?
Well, that'll be, for us, upstairs.
The upper chamber, called the solar, was the farmer's private bed-sitting room.
Started already. Wow,
And a pull-out truckle.
A truckle?
Yeah, it's on wheels. It shoves underneath during the day.
That's where you'll be, Peter. On the truckle.
To pay their monastic landlords, Tudor farmers had to turn a decent profit. Their farm has 5 acres of enclosed fields, as well as access to hundreds of acres of common land and woods. They have cows to pull ploughs and carts, a barley crop, poultry, and a flock of Southdown sheep.
So what kind of farming are we going to be doing then?
Well, your main focus will be sheep, and here's where the relationship between the tenant and the monastery is absolutely central to your productivity. Your wool crop may well be required by the monastery to satisfy the merchants that it's under contract with.
But we can't be completely wool specialists. We do also have to grow arable crops.
Yes, certainly. You'll probably have a barley crop, for example. Also, at this time, what we do see is tenant farmers taking up pig farming in a small way as an additional small enterprise.
Peter, I think we should definitely get some pigs.
Right, if we're getting some pigs, we need a place to put them.
That's a project right there.
It's spring. Ruth, Peter and Tom have to get their money-spinning enterprises up and running as soon as possible. They have just a few weeks to sow crops and get in livestock before Easter. Wool was central to the early Tudor economy. It was known as the jewel in the realm, as it generated half the nation's wealth.
Sheep were the backbone of the British economy. For clothing mostly, and not just for us. British wool was clothing most of Europe. It was the finest quality. Come on, girls. It was all about grazing. The quality of the grass influenced the quality of the wool. And the British system involved quite a lot of moving sheep about. In the winter months, you wanted them down on your arable land, nibbling at the weeds, dropping their dung on your fields. But come spring, you moved them up into the hills, into areas where you can't run a plough. There the grass has come fresh and lush and will sustain your sheep through the summer and allow them to grow that perfect coat.
Only when the sheep are sheared, in a couple of months' time, will they know the quality of the wool. Most Tudor households kept a pig. Since pigs ate almost anything, they were a good way of turning kitchen scraps into meat. But in the early 1500s, monastic farmers began rearing pigs to sell on a commercial scale.
I suppose, modern age, you've got a lot of pig breeds, but the closest to the Tudor breed is the Tamworth, isn't it?
Yeah, a little tamer now, though, aren't they? Much wilder, much more aggressive back then.
The monasteries laid down strict rules for their tenants. It was forbidden for pigs to run free, as they could destroy crops and attack people. So Peter and Tom must build an enclosure.
I suppose pigs, I mean, they're forest dwellers, so to keep them inside, they want to get out.
It's got to be a proper construction project.
Yeah.
No messing around.
The monastery's most valuable asset was their land. In an age when almost every craft relied on wood, management of the coppices was essential. John Roberts looks after this coppice and is helping Tom cut some hazel to build a pig enclosure.
This is all based around the broadleaf's ability to basically regenerate very quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, basically it releases all sorts of hormones in it that kids it into thinking it's young again. So you can make them virtually immortal.
After the wood is cut, new branches quickly sprout, and within a few years it will have produced another crop of hazel poles.
As a tenant farmer, how much wood can I actually take?
Well, that will sort of depend on your tenancy, really. And like today, you get what you pays for. So, sorry, the more rent you're paying, generally the more rights you have. And they might restrict you to how many cartloads you could take, or they might restrict you to how long you could be in there cutting for. You're just spending your time, basically.
Time and effort.
Yes.
Materials gathered, Peter and Tom begin to build the pig enclosure. Tudor farmers had to master all types of building skills to survive.
These things are never as easy as they look.
They've found an area that's already fenced on 3 sides, so they just need to close it off.
We're making good progress with this, Peter. It's hard work, but it's satisfying.
Between these stakes, the coppiced hazel is woven to create what is known as a wattle fence.
So you need to start there.
Yeah.
OK?
Bob Holman's an expert at building Tudor fences.
Do you think this will hold pigs?
Oh, yes, without a doubt.
Yeah.
This would hold an elephant by the time we finished it. So what we're going to do is put our first wand in there, and then weave this through these, pushing it down all the time. Push it down with your feet, give it a good shove, and that's the first one in. The next one, of course, will go on the other side.
Right.
So in that one goes. All the butts will then go on the inside. So we follow that process through, right the way through to the other end. Commonly known as a cockerel knobbler.
Cockerel knobbler.
A cockerel knobbler. To sort of polish a cockerel off, we used to give it a tap on the head before.
Knobbler.
A knobbler.
Oh, I see.
Yes,
Okay.
it's just an expression of speech, but it's very good for tapping the ends in. That's right.
The other side of the pig pen is enclosed with a different type of Tudor fencing, a dead hedge.
Rotten wood, isn't it? It's just rotted away. Well, that's just come out.
Ruth and Tom are making some repairs. Instead of using valuable coppiced hazel, otherwise unwanted twigs could be used.
Basically 2 rows of posts or stakes driven into the ground. Then we take all the stuff that, on the face of it, looks like it's not needed. Hawthorns, brambles, a bit of blackthorn there. You look at the thorns on here, about 1 inch long. I mean, they're sharp as well. They're going to hurt. So if you're an animal trying to force your way in, you've got something to contend with.
You can't, can you? It really,
you can't.
You can
it's going
just
nowhere.
Throw yourself against it and nothing happens.
Exactly.
I think your aim will improve as time goes on, Peter.
I think that is about there.
No pigs getting through there, is it?
After just a day's work, the enclosure is complete.
This fence is as secure as it's going to get. So, hopefully, pigs contained. I mean, that's the great thing about Tudor building. It's all about sourcing your materials from your landscape.
To the monasteries, farming was a sideline, a way of earning money. Their primary purpose was to perform religious worship on such a scale that its spiritual power would benefit every Christian soul.
Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum,
The oldest of all the monastic orders were the Benedictines. Established by Benedict of Nursia in the 6th century, they were bound by vows of celibacy, poverty, and obedience, and followed a demanding daily routine of worship, study, and prayer. Peter is visiting Downside Abbey, a Benedictine monastery, to meet its abbot, Father Aidan Bellinger.
Hello, Father Abbot.
Hello, Peter. Very good to see you.
You
As
too.
it always is.
Tudor tradesmen formed religious guilds to ensure prosperity in this life and safe passage to heaven in the next. Peter wants advice on setting up a guild for farmers.
Which patron saint do you think a guild of farmers would adopt?
I think, in general, the most likely patron for a farmer would actually be St. Benedict himself.
Right, okay.
And one that I'd particularly like to think goes in hand with St. Benedict is St. Benedict's sister, St. Scholastica, who is often seen as the patron saint of good weather. And I think that must be very important for any farmer.
Every area of life was represented by a different saint, as illustrated by this medieval prayer book.
They begin with calendars,
Yeah.
and the months are the same as the months we have now. But many people would identify the day less by the day of the month than by the saint of the day.
Yeah.
And some parts of the year are absolutely full of saints, which gave the people an excuse for jollification and having a good party. But they were also a reminder of the way in which the church and God and the saints intervened in everyday life.
Alleluia.
The first stage in establishing the Guild of St. Benedict is to create a register of its members. Inspired by the prayer book, Peter's commissioning a richly illuminated document. Monasteries employed layfolk to do domestic work like cooking and laundry, and skilled workers to do stone carving, bookbinding, and calligraphy. Josie Brown has begun the calligraphy on vellum made from calfskin.
So how are you getting on with our manuscript?
It's coming along very nicely.
I remember making a quill, but mine, it had quite a lot of feathers on it.
Absolutely. You very often see the romantic idea of using a pretty quill, but we don't use them like that. We cut the ends off because they get in the way, and we strip the barbs and use the pen like that. Not quite so attractive, but much more authentic.
Are you squeezing that to suck ink into this, or are you simply dipping it in?
I'm simply dipping it in, but that's also why the board is at an angle,
Right.
because if you're writing flat, gravity will take over.
Right.
So you want your pen almost horizontal
Right.
to stop the ink flooding.
Once the calligraphy is finished, the document will move on to an artist within the abbey to illuminate the text. The Tudor farmer's day began at sunrise.
Brush the grit off my feet. I don't want a little stone in the bottom of my hose. Now these are made out of sheep's wool, hence the pure whiteness of the doublet here is what's going to hold the hose up. The doublet is just like a jacket essentially. I sew myself together.
But being laced into clothing created problems all of its own.
And the Book of Manners, which essentially tells a page boy how to dress the squire, suggests that he first makes sure that the privy is available, because the implication is that once you're sewn into this, you'd much rather have used the facilities before you did up all the stitches than afterwards. And it certainly is something that you begin to start considering. We talk about rhythms of daily life. Well, I've certainly established my own rhythms of my own daily life. Once in the morning, twice in the evenings, in case you're wondering.
To preserve modesty, a flap of fabric known as a codpiece was worn on the front of the hose.
It's not something you're used to coming across in modern life. And it's tied at the top here, so you can undo the ties
and go to the loo. It's essentially a fly. So it's just like the zip on your jeans, and it's functional and surprisingly comfortable.
For the woman of the house, the first job of the day was to light the fire.
I got my flint and my steel, struck together, they spark. The trick, though, is to catch one of those sparks and to keep it alight. And there. You see it? That little spark.
Ruth uses charred cloth for tinder, which will catch light from a tiny spark.
And now we surround it. And we have fire.
Farmhouses had no glazed windows because glass was expensive. To keep warm, a fire was essential.
So one of the things you may notice is that I'm not doing this in the middle of a hearth, you know, with a chimney. And there's several reasons for that. Most important is probably to do with fuel efficiency, the heating of your home. About 70% of the heat of a fire goes straight up a chimney. That means that if I wanted to keep a house like this warm, I would have to have nearly 3 times as much fuel, day in, day out, with a chimney, as I do with a little fire in the centre of the room. So this is really, really fuel efficient.
For the men, the first job was to feed the livestock. Peter and Tom are sourcing water from the farm's well.
Look at this.
Wow, look at that.
The water is over 20 feet down.
Blimey, that is deep.
To reach it, some ingenious Tudor technology is called for.
I think slow and steady wins the race here, Peter.
Tread wheels were the engines of the day, used to power cranes to build cathedrals, monasteries and castles, as well as to drive machinery.
Slow it down, Peter. I'm applying the brake.
OK, let's get this into the buckets.
OK.
Oh! That was close. So this is going to be ideal water for our cattle, isn't it? Yeah, but humans back then, you know, you got to keep yourself healthy, haven't you? So you need to purify the water, and the best way of doing that is making beer.
Which suits us very well, I think.
Yeah, let's get these to our cows.
Since water from wells was often contaminated, people drank ale all day, every day. The alcohol killed any bacteria, making it safe to drink.
How are those tight clothes working for you now, Peter?
Animals, on the other hand, have better resistance to the bacteria in dirty water, so are less likely to get ill from drinking it.
Perfect. I like that tread wheel. It's really cool.
In a world without electric light, work indoors, like writing accounts or mending clothes, had to be done during daylight hours. The only illumination came from dim lights made from rushes and sheep fat.
What I want to do is sort of end up with pure fat. So that means I've got to cook out all the little bits of blood vessels, skin. And the easiest way to do this is to just boil it all up. I want to boil it until all those great big solid lumps of tallow have dissolved.
The fat needs to boil continuously all morning. As well as breeding sheep, pigs and geese, the Tudor farmer also cultivated crops. The farm is already growing barley, used for making bread and ale. Another essential Tudor crop would be peas.
I mean, obviously, peas are very much a crop you associate with the garden.
Yes, but all the sort of text and evidence that we have that comes down to it shows that they were using it as a field crop as well, on a smaller scale than the barley and the wheat, but nonetheless something that you have out in the field for your livestock and for yourselves.
I think it's ideal.
In modern Britain, we rely quite heavily on potatoes, don't we? Whereas in Tudor Britain, or Tudor England, there are no potatoes.
That is a
Not
good
yet.
point.
Yeah.
That is a very good point, yeah.
Potatoes didn't arrive in Britain until the 1580s. To sow their peas, they are seeking guidance from a Tudor farming manual, Fitzherbert's Book of Husbandry.
You know, if we're following the advice in this book, then we're following the sort of ideas and the farming practice of this era.
Yeah.
In Tudor English, spelling was yet to be standardised, as Peter is discovering.
How will you know?
A seasonable time.
Seasonable time to go upon the land that is ploughed. And if it's...
Sing.
Oh, yeah, and if it sing or cry or make any noise under thy feet, then it is too wet to sow. And if it makes no noise and will bear the horses, then sow in the name of God. You're listening to the land, that's the idea, isn't it? So if it's absolutely saturated with water or anywhere in between, it's going to make a noise. It's going to be squelchy or it's going to be squishy or it's going to sing or cry.
You're going to hear those sort of sticky noises, yeah.
But as soon as that noise ceases, that's when you hit it, that's when you sow.
This certainly isn't singing or crying under my feet. It's pretty darn dry to me.
Before sowing, the land must be ploughed to turn over the soil and return it to bare earth. In Tudor times, the plough would have been pulled by cattle, often oxen, rather than horses. Gwyn and Graceful are one of the only pairs of cattle left in Britain trained to pull a plough. But they haven't worked for a couple of years, so the boys will have to break them in again.
Right old thing. Good old biddy.
Hi, Charles.
Oh, hi, Peter.
Pleased to meet you.
They've called on someone with a lifetime's experience in working with cattle, Charles Martell.
This is Gwyn. She's on the near side, always the short name on the near side of a pair of oxen, and then she's Graceful, double syllable, so that eventually they respond to their name. They don't actually understand English too well, but they can hear the difference in the length of the word. Gwyn, Graceful.
For the first time in 2 years, Gwyn and Graceful are being fitted with a yoke.
One yoke.
All right, there you are. So just hold it, just so she doesn't walk away.
Held in place with oxbows, the yoke is what the plough will be attached to.
Well, they almost look happy.
This is the easy bit. It's when we get out in the field, they see some open grassland and we might not see them again.
Of course, they haven't seen grassland for the best part of winter, I suppose.
Oh dear, don't say that. Steady, 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 steady.
Yeah.
It's like the Blaze Circus, isn't it? All right, old biddies, it's all right. That's just got the edge off them now.
Yeah.
We hope.
We need to convince them to do some work before they get their food, get them into routine, but here they come again.
Yeah, I don't think we should let them out, actually, at the moment, because I'm afraid that's what they're after, is their grub.
Yeah.
So, because I'm afraid if they do go, they'll think it's a great laugh and we might not catch them tonight.
They can smell their grub there.
That's what it is. That's what it is.
So what exactly do people move away from ploughing like oxen, cattle, towards horses?
Two things, I think. First of all, fashion is a big part in it. Yeah.
Really?
You go and see a farmer now, he's careful to say, but you know, the tractor's got to be the latest one, it's got to be the modern one,
right,
it's got to be a bigger one. Oxen were regarded as lowly and sort of poor beasts. And the other thing is speed. Horses were more expensive, but they were fast. So that's why we're in the situation today where working oxen in Britain, this is probably one of the only pairs, and I think it's a great shame.
The sheep fat has spent the morning boiling and has been left to cool, leaving pure tallow on the surface. Ruth's reheating it to make the rushlights.
If you think about modern life, we get sort of fats and oils from a huge number of sources. Things like olives, sunflower seeds, linseed, rapeseed, as well as crude oil and all its various derivatives. But if you're living in around 1500, then the animal fats are pretty much all there is. And those animal fats have got to do every food job, every lighting energy job, every axle grease job. Anything that needs fat has to come from animal fats. And this is the other ingredient, rushes. And the sort you want are those that have a sort of solid pith-like centre. And what I want to do is to soak the fat into the pith. And then that little bit of green rind will act as the wick, which helps that to burn. Right. All I want to do is to soak that just briefly in the fat. And that pith draws the fat into it. That is a rushlight. It's really simple, isn't it?
It's the moment of truth for Gwyn and Graceful. They are about to work for the first time in years.
Whoa!
Once in the field, Charles's fears are realised.
Dear. But look at them now, look. You see, they're not least bit upset.
Yeah.
They had their little run. They're quite fat, so it wasn't very far.
Just need to work out what stop is then.
Stop, yeah.
We've got to get a plough into that soil in the next week or so, otherwise, we're not going to get a crop.
Before the plough is attached, Charles has suggested letting them pull a much lighter implement. It's vital that the ploughed furrows are absolutely straight to ensure every inch of land is turned over. So Tom and Peter must persuade Gwyn and Graceful to walk in a straight line.
Move on, move on. Come on, come on.
Come on.
There we go. Just need to tap them ever so gently, don't you? And they just move. It's amazing. They look kind of happy. They're earning their food now. Come on, come on. And keep them moving. That's the trick, apparently. Don't let them stop. Come on. Oh, come on.
Well, there they are. They're working. I'm amazed. Pete's a bit noisy. You don't need to shout him like that. They've got quite good hearing, oxen, but I'll tell him about that in a minute. I'm impressed. It's lovely, and the next stage is ploughing.
Well done, girls. Well done.
As night fell, with the farmhouse plunged into darkness, the Tudor farmer would go to bed.
It's about the same as a candle flame, isn't it? Not much different. Smells a lot worse. There ain't much work you can do by rushlight. Beautiful day.
It was believed that devotion to a patron saint through a religious guild was the key to success. At the monastery, the calligraphy on the Guild of St. Benedict register is complete. Next, a painter illuminates the text. As with all trades of the day, it wasn't only creative skills that were required, but also craft skills to make the tools for the job. Artist Mark Goodman begins by making a brush from a feather.
A simple way to get a point on it is just to cut it through just over halfway. We've now got a point on our feather. We can cut the feather off. We can then make a tube, and then we can push the feather through the tube. And as you see, there we have a brush. Then the only last bit that you've got to worry about is your stick, which of course you can get anywhere. And there we have it, a paintbrush.
To paint these very fine details, the Tudor artist had an ingenious solution.
Just a glass globe full of water. If it's not full of water, nothing happens with it really. As you can see there, the trick is filling it with water. As soon as you fill it with water, then it becomes a large magnifying lens. This one's around about 16 times magnification.
Illumination was a complex and expensive process, so reserved only for special books and documents like this register. After many hours of delicate work, the register is complete, an indelible record of the Guild of St. Benedict's paying members. The Guild would have funded an altar in the local church dedicated to their cause.
Pre-Reformation churches look completely different. Look at all the imagery on the walls.
This chapel at St. Fagans has been restored to how it would have been in 1500. In the late 1520s, Henry VIII broke away from the Roman Church and formed the Church of England, beginning a process that would see the monasteries destroyed and parish churches like this one stripped of their splendour.
This is the side altar of our guild, the one that we maintain and look after. And here, we, as ordinary lay folk, pay for a priest to come and do additional masses for the souls of all of us within the guild, for now and forevermore. These are in need of some TLC, aren't they? Look at that. Not only covered in wax, but filthy. So that's a job for me.
Tom and Peter have spent the last week getting the cattle used to working again.
We've got 5 willing participants at the moment, I believe. Ruth's happy, Peter's kind of happy.
There we go.
Now they're ready to take the plough for the first time in years.
This is the moment of truth. These cows are getting restless, they want to get on with some work. OK, Tomo, we're in your hands. Work on. Straight line, Tomo, straight line. This is good, I think. Yeah, we are experimenting here.
It's vital that Gwyn and Graceful plough in straight lines.
Geoway.
Now that's nice. That's good. Keep that straight line.
Geoway. We're going straight. What are you doing at the back?
Those cows straight. They need a line to follow.
Really?
And unfortunately for us,
Look at it.
we've got a bit of spaghetti ploughing.
Spaghetti ploughing. That's worse than spaghetti ploughing.
But the ploughing goes from bad to worse.
Walk on. Come on.
You all right, Tommy?
Walk on.
We've got cow mutiny.
Walk on.
Gwyn and Graceful are exhausted after just a couple of furrows.
Oh dear, the problem is they're really hating this, aren't they?
I think they're just not used to having the equipment on them. They're just not happy with it. So once you've got that pressure of pulling the plough, when we're trying to go deeper, it's too much work for them. They're just not happy.
Getting the peas in the ground within the next week is crucial. Otherwise, the crop will fail. Also pressing is the pig concern.
Oh, here we go. Timber.
The enclosure's complete, but now they must build a shelter within it. Pigs don't like drafts, so if they're to breed successfully, the shelter must have solid walls. They're basing the design on medieval buildings they've excavated as archaeologists. But constructing the walls without nails is proving tricky.
Oh, this one's high.
Yeah.
I think I might need to get the axe.
Or we could bash it. If we bash it.
Tom and Peter have rather different ideas as to how it should be built.
You split that timber.
What?
I think basically it should be shaped slightly with the axe. And Peter's just enjoying hitting stuff with a piece of wood.
That one's fat.
You're damaging my timber.
Wiggle, 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 wiggle. Ooh. Right. Move that across like that. There we go. Bob on. I'm so impressed by this, Tom. You really have outdone yourself.
Yeah, friendship's still intact.
Just.
It's 2 weeks until Easter. For Tudors, it was preceded by Lent, 40 days of fasting and reflection ending on Easter Sunday. The Church dictated that no meat or fish be eaten, and in this God-fearing society, it was a practice observed by almost everyone. Vegetables from the garden were essential for survival.
Of course, the whole point of gardening at this period of history is to have something to eat every day. And if you look around you, you can see just how hard that can be. Oddly enough, you might think that the hungriest period of the year is in the dead of winter, but that's not quite true. It's really sort of now that we call traditionally the hungry gap. That part of the year between your supplies, your stores beginning to run low, and the new harvests arriving.
There are just leeks, parsley, and a vegetable that's long since disappeared from the kitchen.
This is Alexander's. I think the Romans brought them over to begin with. They're very versatile. These young leaves are edible just as they are, and these are a real treat. Can you see the flower heads in here? Just forming underneath. Poach just those. They're absolutely delicious. This is a real favourite of mine this time of year. Primroses, delicious salad. You just pull the petals, so you just get that bit out. And they are so lovely, and if the sun's been on them, they're really sweet. They're really tasty.
Here we go. Weavy, weavy, weavy.
To construct the pig shelter walls, Peter and Tom are using a building technique that's been around for over 6,000 years, wattle and daub. Thin hazel sticks are woven around the uprights to create a fence. Then a mixture of clay, horse dung and straw is daubed onto it, creating a solid, draft-proof wall.
I mean, look how easily that just works into the wattle. That's amazing. The stickiness comes from the manure. Sorry, this is really quite horrible. Probably going to be as strong as bricks. All the pressure is spread out over all the different bits of wattle. All this is going to dry, go solid. You know, it's not hard to work with. It's just unpleasant.
500 years ago, this was the way most houses were built.
And obviously our farm cottage, you can see the timber structures and the panels in between. They're all wattle and daub, beautifully smoothed off. We're building pigsties in exactly the same way that Tudor cottage was built.
Ruth's equipping the farmhouse with utensils and tableware. In Tudor times, these were sourced from local craftsmen, and most villages would have had a dish maker. Today, there's just one professional wooden dish maker left in Britain, aptly named Robin Wood.
Right, here we go.
Right, so this is what you're going to make a house out of?
Yeah, out of each log like this, I get 3 dishes.
So we're not trying to make them out of slices that way. It's not like that's the bowl.
Yeah, exactly. All the strength in wood is the fibres running along this way. So if you just cut a ring off like this, then they'd all be very short fibres and it'd just break apart.
The dishes are hewn from a hardwood, such as beech.
Nice. Let's see what we've got. There it goes.
The dish is roughly shaped, using just one tool, an axe.
And these are your chisels?
Yeah, forge all these myself, and traditionally then forging your tools would have been part of the apprenticeship of the job.
Right.
Then it's turned, using a foot-operated pole lathe. It's a device so simple and ingenious that it saw use from the 10th century right through until the 20th.
Clunk.
Clunk. I love the way it's turning it around really is as simple as that.
Throughout history, these wooden dishes have gone in and out of fashion.
In the Roman period, they all ate from ceramic. And then we had about 1,000 years when people ate from wood. And then it was really the 18th century when the Stoke pottery started mass producing very cheap ceramic, that we went back to being a ceramic culture. Oy, there we go. There we go, all finished.
Wow, that is beautiful.
Probably 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge handed down through the generations gone into that bowl.
In the 1500s, people ate their main meal at 11 o'clock in the morning. Having risen at dawn, by then the farm workers would have been ravenous. Taking pride of place on the Tudor table was the salt.
Without salt, people for centuries and centuries and centuries would have found living in the northern climes nigh impossible. Salt allows you to preserve meat, it allows you to preserve fish.
Like most things in Tudor life, even setting the table was laden with Christian symbolism.
You might look at it and think, it looks rather like an altar in a church, and that's what many people in the period thought too. They made the connection between dining and God's table. There was something of the sacred in the daily ritual of eating a meal, something of remembering Christ, something of an echo of the Last Supper. And people were quite conscious of that. They wrote about it at the time, they talked about it at the time, and they quite deliberately made the most of it.
It's the week before Easter. If the peas aren't planted now, they won't have time to germinate and grow. Peter and Tom have spent the week getting Gwyn and Graceful used to working again.
Whoa! They're fast. They're faster than I thought they'd be.
That's good. Go on, girls. Walk on.
Finally, the field is ploughed and harrowed to break up the soil.
I'm just giving them a little helping hand here to take a bit of the pressure off.
Whoa! Whoa! Steady.
The peas can now be sown. Peter's taking advice from the Book of Husbandry.
Let thy left foot before, and take a handful of peas, and when thou take up thy right foot, then can throw thy pea.
Surely just throw, Peter. Just throw. 1,
2, 3.
Hand broadcasting seeds was inevitably haphazard. It wasn't until the invention of Jethro Tull's seed drill 200 years later that seeds could be sown in regular rows, evenly spaced.
By putting your left foot forward and then throwing with your right, left foot forward, throwing with your right, does mean that you are trying to get them broadcast as evenly as possible.
Come summer, they should have a crop to harvest. It's Palm Sunday, marking the last week of Lent. It commemorates Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem when palm leaves were laid before him, days before he was betrayed and crucified. Peter has a key role in the celebrations.
Palm Sunday, starting around about 1490, people used to dress up as prophets. Basically a yeoman or a respected member of the village, but a layperson, such as myself, would don the outfit of a prophet, and the more dramatic the better, such as John the Baptist emerging from the wilderness. And records show that villagers would actually hire in beards so they could dress up their prophets accordingly. It wasn't meant to poke fun. "'Tis I, John the Baptist. Right. I wonder if they'll recognise me."
The most important ritual of Palm Sunday was Holy Mass.
Hic est qui de Edom venet tinctis.
Delivered in Latin, The text would not have been understood by the congregation, but its rituals were.
Nomine Dei Patris Omnipotente, et in nomine Jesu Christi.
Central to the Mass was the blessing of greenery, symbolizing the palms that were laid before Jesus.
Tuos et speculum per ignem. Amen.
Then the blessed branches were turned into crosses, symbolic of the crucifixion. Finally, the congregation processed from the church with their crosses, which would then be taken home to protect them for the year to come. Professor Ronald Hutton, an expert on English rituals, explains the importance of Palm Sunday celebrations in early Tudor England.
You get three things in one. You get people reminded of what this the Christian message and the Christian story is all about. You get the greenery, which symbolises spring and hope and new life. And you get something which is actually going to protect your house and your family and your farm. And all this in one, symbolised in this procession, with a layman, that's Peter up there, dressed up as a prophet, to dress this up as fun, to make it something which people can engage in and which they can make their own, is just a totally brilliant way of giving religion to the people and enabling them to share in it.
By the 1500s, there was a new raucous side to the celebrations.
The truly insanely wonderful thing about Palm Sunday ritual is that it ended in a kind of spring version of a snowball fight. And it's a wonderful example of the way in which religion, round about 1500, introduced an element of just sheer merrymaking at the end of something solemn and profound, to remind us that we're alive, and being alive means having fun.
Oh, sure. I can't do anything.
Being a prophet has its advantages. I'm staying well out of the melee.
This is the last ritual of Palm Sunday, but it's a really important one. It's where we take the crosses woven out of our consecrated greenery and put them over the doorway of your home to protect it for the next year against witchcraft, curses, demons and general misfortune. It's the ultimate security system, circa 1500.
Does it work?
Apparently so. England's still here.
Can't argue with that.
Have a nice Tudor Easter.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Connie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
It's late spring. The pea crop is coming through.
It's a really healthy looking crop, isn't it? I mean, the sun's really helping. You just look out there. I mean, that's very impressive, if I say so myself.
But the pigsties are still not finished. Without a shelter, they can't introduce pigs and breed them for cash.
This was all we'd been doing. This project, it would happen like that, but the problem is we've got the field to sort out, we've got the farm to sort out, we've got the animals to sort out. Everything needs attention, everything requires your time.
We sweated, we've bled.
We've argued.
We've argued.
We've road tested not only our skills, but our friendship. From here on in, you and I can do anything, absolutely anything.
For the roof, they're making shingles, wooden tiles.
That's pretty good, actually.
But I think it will shed water.
Well, they are pigs, so they can't be too fussy. It's time to get the pigs in.
Yeah, I think so. Cool.
As soon as Lent was over, meat could be eaten once again.
And at this time of year, it's one particular meat. This is veal. You have to kill a young calf if you want to have cheese for the rest of the year. So Easter is all about veal.
Rennet from the calf's stomach is essential in cheese making. With the meat, Ruth's cooking a Tudor favourite, pottage.
This, with its Easter veal and its fresh young Alexanders, last year's leeks and last year's beans, is just typical of this couple of weeks of the year. 2 or 3 weeks' time, I won't be able to make this pottage. Half these ingredients won't be around. So although, in some ways, a diet in the late medieval, early Tudor period can sound a little boring, you know, bread and pottage, next day, bread and pottage, next day, bread and pottage. Nonetheless, it actually hides, those words hide quite a lot of variety, as week by week by week, that pottage changes all through the year.
Local farmer Neil Careswell is delivering 2 Tamworth sows and 6 piglets. Tamworths can be dangerous, but Neil's got some advice on how to move them safely around.
If you try and push a pig from behind, they're a lot bigger than you, they're a lot stronger than you, and if they don't want to do it, they will just come through the other way. So if you try and use psychology more than brute strength, you'll be a little bit more successful. The best thing to do is convince them that you're brilliant and you've got some food. As you can tell, you know, definitely enjoying that. They're not taking a blind bit of notice of us, which is a good sign, Peter.
It's amazing how much they complete this area.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been quite sterile up until now, and all of a sudden it's like, that's why we're doing all the work. Lord, let us remember just how much effort goes into putting food on the table. Amen.
Amen. By 11 o'clock in the morning, with the livestock fed and watered, workers would head to the farmhouse for their main meal of the day.
Well, it's not every day you find yourself in a Leonardo da Vinci painting, is it?
The Last Supper. It does, doesn't it, have that sort of religious feel?
Echoes just how much the church influenced society.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of embedded and ingrained through absolutely everything you do.
Powers have changed, kings have come and gone, but the church has always been there.
It was the one way you understood where you'd come from, where you were going to, how you related to the natural world. And really we should see our farming through that lens, you know, how the crops grow, what we're doing on the land. If we want to get into the minds of people in 1500, we should be trying to see that through the lens of the church.
Next time on Tudor Monastery Farm, the team explore how farms made money to pay the rent.
Oh, that was a good dunk.
By farming sheep.
Well, I guess the question is, are you going to buy our wool?
As we say in the monastery, you have to have faith.
Yeah, we certainly will.
Adopting new technology.
Quite noisy.
And trading their wares.
So, geese for sale, people. Anyone want a goose? If you don't want a whole goose, we've got parts of geese.
And then over she goes.
Steady, girl.
Here we.
That's the way. Nice.
Watch those flanks. They're going again. Quite noisy.
It's a really violent process.
Amen.
This is merry England, for heaven's sake, so to speak. Let's enjoy it.
In 1500, those farmers who were in a position to rent large parcels of land from people like the monasteries were becoming much more businessmen and perhaps businesswomen. They were thinking much more in terms of profit and loss and accumulated wealth than perhaps had been the case before. I mean, this is a moment in which farming is beginning to change into something that's closer to the buying and selling and trading and merchant thinking that we're so accustomed to these days.
We've got 2 sitting over there. 6 very angry ones there.
So we're going to have a load of little goslings pretty soon.
That's very exciting. Just hope these ones come out then. A bit of hissing starting up. Look pretty good condition, those ones, don't they? This is when it gets exciting, though.
They're certainly good mothers, aren't they? Because they're hissing, they're protecting their nests.
Yeah, I'm always a little wary of being in here.
If we don't feed them in here, they might not go out for food, so they'll start losing condition, they won't be able to rear their young properly, we'll have massive problems. But a little bit of pottage goes a long way.
Looks better than it did last night, actually, in my opinion.
Oh, no, don't step on them. That's how we lose our goose concern.
Back in the Tudor times, good source of revenue.
Exactly, and we are here to make money.
We've got a Whitsun fair coming up, so it might be nice to take a couple of our geese to market, especially since we've got little goslings coming on.
So your mud, stones goes in there.
Yep.
And you basically just swing it.
Yes, almost like a slingshot.
Are these going to be any good for controlling our sheep?
They will be in the confined spaces of the lanes. If you've got a gap you don't want them to go through or they're hesitating, then you can throw some stones ahead of them and that will frighten them out of that gap.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
Obviously, they've got a practical purpose, but they do look quite fun.
They are fun.
Hopeless. I just miss them entirely. Oh, that was a bit better.
Yeah, that's better.
Whee!
Yeah.
Sheep naturally flock together.
Right.
So that's an essential characteristic of sheep. There are only really 3 commands. Go left, go right, and stop. And that's the key one.
That's the key one. Nice and simple, then.
If you don't stop your dog, then she'll just drive him off and they'll disappear. If you've got those 3 commands, your dog will work sheep. Walk on. Go on, Beth. Go on, Beth. We're getting them moving. Bess, this way. Bess, here to me.
You see how she drops her head down to the ground, can't you?
She's tracking them.
Yeah.
She tracks them. Bessie!
They don't seem too spooked at the moment.
Bess, this way. Bess, here to me. Go on, Bess. Go on, Bess. Walk on.
Worth their weight in gold, eh?
Hey! They're off!
Crook time, isn't it?
Oh.
And that did nothing. Come on, sheep. Head. 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 Good sheep. They know where they want to go. They'll get there. Good. Watch those flanks. They're going again. Stay on the lane. These crooks are actually pretty good. I'm going for the scattergun approach with stones. Love it.
Oh, they've seen the grass now. No bother now.
Yeah. Who's going in first? You, me, or the sheep?
Sheep seems happy.
She coming up clean?
No.
No, not really compared to before, to be honest. We want to get all the dirt out of the fleece. Not just so you've got a nice clean fleece at the end, but also if the shears come across anything, it will blunten them.
Yeah, runaway sheep. It's going back.
So Peter's just driving around to the other side of the pond.
Right, another victim. Come on. Come on, girl.
You'll enjoy it once you're in there. Everyone else has.
Come on. Whew. Here we are. Hello.
I mean, what's the deal with the wool? If it's really mucky.
Well, if it's all glued together by dung, then you can't use it. It becomes unsaleable and unusable.
Oh, that was a good dunk.
So doing this increases a farmer's profit margins,
Not
essentially.
indeed. She's done. Let her out.
I thought they were supposed to be white sheep, these ones.
I know they look dirty on the outside, but if we've managed to get the dung off from underneath and out in the matting, a bit of surface silt might not be that bad.
Yes. I don't know how efficient we're being, but we're definitely quicker.
Apart from naughty sheep, we did quite well.
It sort of worked, didn't it? I'll be honest, I thought it was great fun.
Oh, it's cold, 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 cold.
Unfortunately, I've got a summer cold and it's starting to get into my throat. So I'm going to try and find myself a remedy. And in a Tudor garden, we've got a number of plants that I can use. We have ground ivy, they called ale hoof, partly because it looks like a hoof. And the leaves are also used to flavour ale hoof. Very interesting concept, the idea of edible weeds, and essentially this is one of them. Back in Tudor times was always honey, because sugar is so exotic, it's so expensive, it's got so far to travel. So I'm just going to add a bit of hot water here. And you know what they say, what doesn't kill you. That's really nice. That's really good. Hopefully that'll work its magic. So for me, it's back to work. Ooh, getting stiff.
Milking sheep for sheep's cheese was really common through the High Middle Ages, but was already beginning to go out of fashion, if that's the right word, in 1500. Basically, a cow gives so much more milk than a sheep, more than 10 times as much milk. So many people were beginning to leave off milking their sheep and turning for milk instead to a cow. But monastic herds were a bit different, basically because they were so large. When you've got these huge flocks up on the hill and somebody's got to be there looking after them day and night anyway, milking them and making use of that produce just makes a whole lot more sense. And the milk itself, well, that was mostly used for cheese making, and that's what I plan to do.
Keep your feet out of it, girl. No.
They look a little something like this. It's kind of bottle-shaped. So you've got these curves, and then there's slats in between. And this whole bench, it's going to keep the sheep off the ground. It's going to keep the wool clean. But this bit is where the sheep's going to go, and this bit is where you're going to sit. Now, the bit I'm trying to do at the moment, and I think the really hard bit, are these outside edges. I'm going to try and steam bend 2 pieces of hazel. And I've never steam bent a piece of wood in my life, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I know the theory. It looks disturbingly like a grave at the moment.
but I think it's just the right size. These stones are going to act as a radiator. They're going to retain the heat of the fire. I'm then going to cover them with wet straw and wet grass, into which I will put the piece of wood that I want to bend. And the heat from those stones, that will heat up the moisture in that grass, and that will turn into steam and force itself into the wood. To make my fire, I've essentially built a chimney, and inside that I'm going to put a few oak shavings, and around it I'll put my wood upright. And the thing about the wood being upright is it will transport this heat up and just get that fire going. Relatively more successful than I thought it would be.
Just heated the milk over the fire next door, bringing it up to blood temperature. And now I'm going to settle it in wooden bowls. And I'm doing that because I don't want it to cool down too quickly. I want the wood to insulate, to keep my milk as warm as possible. Having stirred it, I now want to leave it very still. And if I've got the right temperature and the right strength of rennet, over the next sort of half an hour or so, it will set into curds and whey. Then you'll notice the windows. You can see that they provide loads of light, but more importantly, they provide ventilation. I've got a through draft. The next thing to look at is the floor. Tiles. These tiles are not glazed, they're porous, which means that they will hold water, and that is really important. That's where the clever bit comes in. Here we go. The water sinks into the pores of the tiles and sits there. And then gradually, over the next few hours, it quietly evaporates. And as it evaporates, it cools the room. And with my strong cross draft between my north and my east windows, it's drawing that damp air out all the time, allowing more to rise and fill its space. This room will sit at between 5 and 6 degrees, almost regardless of what the weather does outside.
Oh, wow, the heat coming off this is intense. We're pretty much ready to steam our wood. Ah, dear. Either that, we're going to set fire to our straw, and then we'll have to start again. On it goes. There we go. Oh. Right. I think I've got to be pretty fast with this. You can already see the steam coming up. Some sort of vision of hell. There we go. Wood in. And of course, this isn't going to catch fire because fire needs 3 things. It needs heat, which it's got. It needs fuel, which I'm giving it, but it needs oxygen, which I'm about to take away. The reason why I have to work so quickly is because already you can see the steam coming up, and I've got to keep that steam in there, because otherwise the straw will dry out and there won't be the moisture to steam my wood.
Okay, just, oh, that's a good set. Really pleased. They've all set beautifully. So now I have to start separating out the whey from the curd. You can see little bits of it are already here, this very pale greeny yellow liquid. That's the whey. And the next stage now is to cut it and to try and drain some of that whey out. In later centuries, you'd use, fancy knives to make perfect cubes of curd. In 1500, you use these. Just pop that up on the draining stool. You should start to see the whey is dripping through.
Hopefully, this has had enough steaming time. Off it comes. Oh, look, you can still see a bit of steam there. That's a good sign. Right, let's just get it in here. Yeah. And there it goes. That is pretty hot, actually. And there we go. We've got our two sides of our shearing bench. Brilliant.
What I'm doing is making a salve for our sheep, just in case of nicks or cuts. It stops the parasites getting in there, prevents things like maggots, which will obviously harm the sheep, but also affect the quality of the wool. Quite simple. Just, here we go. To make broom salve. 4 ingredients: broom, which is what I've just been cutting up. I need suet, I need brine, and I need urine. I'm just going to finish off this bit of broom here. And the reason the urine works well, if you leave it 3 weeks, it reacts with the air, creating ammonia. And ammonia is what actually gives our salve its healing and cleansing properties. Mix it together. Okay, see that out. Interesting thing, that quite often they were using things, they weren't 100% sure why they worked. I mean, it was acts of faith. Got with me in this, and hopefully it works.
So this one now has had a full press on both sides. It should be ready to come out of its cloths. Let's have a little look. In she comes. What I'm doing now is maturing it, and I need to sort of develop a rind on the cheese, so that's where the salt comes in. From today onwards, I'll wipe it down each day with brine, and then tomorrow, the next one will join it on the shelf. And at the end of the week, there should be 5 or 6 ready for Whitsun Market. Works really well, this broom. This seems to get everything out of all the little crooks and crannies. Now, I might stick a bigger, longer handle in it.
Having a look around, and there's just no evidence whatsoever of any eggs hatching. We've got a goose here that's sitting, but it's over a month now and no sign of any goslings. And that means we can't actually increase our gaggle. It's not the end of the world. However, we want to make money. I mean, this is why we have them. This is why we're feeding them, looking after them. Best we can hope for, sell them for meat and feathers, and that's about it.
Girls, come on, nice and steady. That's it, my loves.
Is there anything? Not going to be easy, is it?
Oh, right, let's get this shearing bench together.
Your Tudor flat pack.
My Tudor flat pack.
It's very impressive, actually.
Right. Yeah, look, made to measure almost.
That's it.
Brilliant.
Right,
Go and get the hurdle. You got the front end?
Got the front end.
Ready, 1, 2, 3. Up. And she's down. It's a lovely, rich fleece, and hopefully your shearing bench will be up to the mark. And that is really this, the flanks. You don't want to go too high to the head, and you don't want this belly wool. The other team will get that off. You're right-handed, aren't you? So you want your left hand and your left arm just to pull the skin tight and try and make the blades. You want to kiss the skin. Remember, this is your high-value wool. You want as much of it as possible. And remember, you're trying to do it all in one smooth motion.
Some bits come off really easily.
Yes.
These blades go right through.
And if you get it right, you will feel it almost fly through the wool. That's it.
Is that far enough?
You're probably going just a little high. Can you see you're a bit higher than me? Remember, this is your high-value wool. You want as much of it as possible. Just get it down as close to the skin as you can. You're doing really well. No, you are, really.
Well, got a slight cut here. I'm going to apply some salve to cover that up. Obviously, we don't want maggots and stuff getting in.
No, that's it. That's brilliant. Right, well, I think we're about done on this side. Shall we turn her?
That sounds interesting.
And if you bring her up here, I will have a go at shearing a bit of her. Sat down, as they would have done. If you get that other leg, that's it. Onto her back to start with. 1, 2, 3. And then over she goes.
Still lively, isn't she?
Yes, yes. Actually, this is quite comfy. It's well made.
It's quite sturdy, isn't it?
Yeah. It's coming off quite well. We are.
Okay, go. Come on.
Let's grab another one.
Why not?
Not going to be doing a perfect job as a shearer. There'll be bits of field, there'll be bits of manure or dung.
Yeah, so a bit like that.
That would be hard to pull apart nicely. Get rid of it.
Right, I'm getting rid of it. Why then is it that the monasteries have this reputation for really good wool and tenant farmers have a reputation for much poorer wool?
Money. Money. If you own the land, you put your sheep on the best bits. If you have lots and lots and lots of sheep, you can choose from a huge number for good genetic stock, good breeding stock.
If we're going to send this off to the monastery, we have to select only the very best of our wool in order to meet that quality bar. So just move it along. No, that's still a lot heavier that side. That level? Yeah, it looks about level. So that's just a smidgen over £20. So for 10 fleeces...
Very good.
That's not bad, is it? They're pretty good fleeces then.
Welcome. Good, good. Welcome. Welcome. Good, good.
What do we actually think about this wool?
Well, you're a big chap, so I think it's absolutely fantastic. When you look at some wool like this, you could judge some of it by just looking at it. You're looking for wool which is fairly even coloured, and then if you feel the wool, there's all sorts of things you can tell about the quality. If you sort of spin a bit of yarn in your hand and you break it next to your ear and it goes ping, then the fibres are strong and the yarn will be strong. But if it pulls apart, the chances are there's weakness in the fibre.
What would happen to it now?
The monastery, of course, is going to look after its own interest, and they are concerned to manage their brand image. They want to collaborate with their tenants, but only if they hold to that quality threshold. If so, then we will include it in the deal that we do with the merchant. And if you produce something that is substandard, we certainly will overlook you.
We could end up with absolutely nothing, all that work.
Yeah.
Assuming I will pass the test, are we likely to see any money at the end of the day?
Well, don't hold your breath. It's going to take a while. We deal with a middleman. The middleman brokers a deal with a merchant. The merchant then sells the wool on the European market. And really, it's only when that sale is concluded that money begins to pass back down the chain to the producer. You're putting your faith in the whole deal coming off.
Well, I guess the question is, are you going to buy our wool?
I am going to recommend that we put this into our brand wool, as James says.
The one thing I didn't think was I was going to go home empty-handed.
Well, as we say in the monastery, you have to have faith. For the time being.
It's just coming up to the Feast of Pentecost, or Whitsun, one of the many religious festivals that punctuated the year.
And part of the celebrations, live dove is released in the church, or in some parishes, a mechanical dove. And I get this year's star prize of making a mechanical dove. The religious calendar, of course, was the calendar. That was the way that people kept track of time, knowing when to plant a crop, when to reap it. Also knowing things like, when you've got a meeting coming up, you'd say, oh, well, I'll meet you the day after St. Agnes Day. All sorts of ordinary practical things were linked and tied and counted by the religious rhythm of life.
Come on. I reckon he's the gander. Oh.
It's good exercise for us.
Give me a sheep any day.
Good job. Good job.
Yeah, these feet, they're going to have to walk long distances. Well, these feet are designed for swimming, aren't they? Now, that beak's designed for pecking.
Yeah, I appreciate you holding that. What do you think? Doesn't look convinced.
I'm not overly convinced.
Let's pull that tight and tie that on behind.
But I tell you what, her heart isn't hammering or anything like that. She's perfectly calm.
That one seems pretty secure. Looking pretty good.
Give her a go?
Yeah. Stand to one side in case she's...
Oh, boots off. The other one's all right.
On.
No, it's not. Back to the drawing board.
So the first process is to card it. I mean, really, it's a sort of cleaning process, cleaning and organising the fibres. But I think you can see that already it is starting to look more like soft, fluffy wool. Some people call this a great wheel because it's big, and others call it a walking wheel because you spend such a lot of time walking backwards and forwards. Indeed, somebody once estimated that it could be about 30 miles a day a really good spinner walked. I'm not quite up to their standards. So a really good spinster, and that, of course, is the female form of somebody who spins. And they were mostly unmarried girls, so you can see why it was that the word spinster came to mean an unmarried girl as well as somebody who spins. Give the wheel one flick and walk backwards, controlling the fibres with one hand, 15, maybe even 20 feet, before, by moving her arm round and changing direction, giving another flick, the same motion, wound the thread onto the spindle. When you look at the textiles that were actually produced during this period on this technology, it just blows your mind. There are threads produced by hand like this that rival anything any modern machine can achieve.
This is new technology. This is the new way to make iron. The charcoal is fed in from the top of the furnace, as is the iron ore, and it slowly descends down through the furnace over the course of time. And as it goes down, of course, it melts, held in the bottom of the furnace in a liquid form, and then you allow it to run out into a mould, right? Have a feel.
Really solid.
About every 12 hours, you produce a length of iron, probably 10 feet long, weighing about half a ton.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. Very heavy.
It's very heavy.
Key to the bellows, of course, is water power, because what is powering those bellows is a water wheel, so that they pump that blast of air into the furnace.
Hence it's a blast furnace.
It's the blast furnace, yes.
And am I right in thinking that these things ran for months at a time?
Yes, they'd go into blast, they'd blow them in, as they would say, blow them in after the harvest, so once your labour force is available.
Yeah.
And then you'd work the iron through the winter, because then you've got a more reliable water supply. What you get eventually is this, which is bar iron, suitable for blacksmiths to make into objects and ironmongers to sell. Here's a couple of pieces you can take back to the farm.
I'll take this one, it's like me, it's broad and flat, and whereas that one is
thick.
Square and, square and thick.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good to see you.
Pleasure. Thank you. What are we going to make?
I mean, we're putting all that yarn that we produced onto the loom, and we start with each thread at that end, and they all have to pass through these here, these shafts.
Yes. The strings are called heddles. They have got two important knots here in the centre, and the knots create a lovely little eye through which every thread goes, and the threads go one thread through one heddle. Yes.
So if we could take that thread there, that comes through.
That comes through
to
shaft
this.
number 1.
So my little hook goes through.
Yeah, and I'll put the yarn onto your hook and you pull it through.
Just pull it through the eye there.
That's it.
Or not many to go, but still, let's get them right.
But in the long term, we have something like 600 threads here. We need to keep them all under control, and that's what the stages of processes are, putting order into the threads.
Otherwise, we just have a giant knot.
You'd have a terrible mess on your hands. And just check that the tension is even all the way across.
I suppose this only comes with practice, the getting the feel.
It's the feel, it's in your fingertips, yes, yes.
It is very technical, isn't it? Tiny, subtle changes make the difference between success and failure.
Indeed, they do.
So you press down on one of the pedals and one of the shafts comes up. and the other one comes down. So now we've got half of our threads going up, half of our threads going down, and a gap between the two.
The gap's called the shed.
The shed.
And that's where we pass the shuttle. It's the first thread through, and we pull the beater and beat the first weft into place.
And then you press the other pedal, and the other shaft comes up. So now all the threads that were down were now up, and all the threads that were up are now down. And there we have weaving. That is it, isn't it? In some ways, this is a really simple piece of technology. In other ways, it's really quite subtle and complex. But whichever way you look at it, I mean, it hasn't actually changed that much.
Yes, the only difference is it works a little bit faster. It's just to do with speed.
So this needs fulling. What exactly is it the fulling does?
Right, and what will happen now, if we were to go outside and hold this to the light, you see the light coming through the cloth after fulling. What happens, the cloth will tighten down and there'll be no light coming through, and it fats it up, gives a nice softer effect to it.
So we're changing something that looks almost like sacking into something that looks like this?
Probably over time, yeah, we'll change into that.
And we do it by bashing it with hammers?
These two hammers here will do the work for us. Just make sure we don't get our hands caught. It's like this effect, up and down. It'll be quite noisy, so it's quiet at the moment. When the water will be running through and the hammers go, and it'll be quite noisy.
Okay, ready? Out. Woo!
Quite noisy.
It's a really violent process, isn't it? So, I mean, having put so much work into spinning and weaving that cloth, this is a bit terrifying, frankly.
It is a bit, but the end result will be nice. It's worth the effort.
Monasteries, we were required to use their mill. They had something of a monopoly. If we want our cloth fulled, we have to bring it to the monastic mill. Mills, therefore, were a really important source of income for the monasteries. It's another way, I suppose, of taxing your tenants. Look how it's changed. Look. It's all gone fluffy. It's all knitted up together. Needs a bit longer yet, but we're definitely getting somewhere. Stretch it out on the tender hooks, get it under tension, which obviously is where, you know, why we say that somebody's on tender hooks if they're feeling really highly strung, because that's exactly what I'm going to do to the cloth. If you don't stretch it, you end up with a sort of rumpled effect on the cloth. It never lies flat, it always sort of lies puckered. You also find that you can't abide by the law. Legally, if you're going to sell the cloth, you've got to be able to produce a perfect product, a consistent product. So if your cloth shrank too much, it would be unsaleable unless you could stretch it back out to the prescribed legal length and legal width. Nice and taut. And when it's dry, it'll have set square.
Yep, I've seen it all.
A chest of cloth like this represents a serious amount of wealth, as, to be honest, do the clothes I'm stood up in.
Come on. I've heard you to market.
Glad to get rid of these guys.
No, I'm sick of them.
They're so vicious, aren't they?
Just aggression, isn't it?
Geese for sale, people. Anyone want a goose?
I'm interested in the geese. I'm not so interested in industrial.
What I was going to say, if you don't want a whole goose, we've got parts of geese. All this sort of stuff we take for granted. It would have been new and exciting in Tudor England.
And our most wonderful luxury. Not many people have seen these lemons and don't know what to do with them.
I suppose England's wealth was built on the wool trade, and this is competition coming in right here.
Well, if it brings things like this in, a bit of flavour, something we're not used to, I think it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Hi, Ruth.
All right, Ruth.
Hello.
How's your cheese?
I've only got a little bit left.
That's fantastic. Well, it sounds like we've got a bit of time for a bit of fun. Bit of Morris dancing.
Bit of ale.
Bit of ale. Bit of music.
Bit more ale.
Let's go.
Whitsun around 1500 is party time for two reasons. The first is it's a gap in agriculture. You've done your ploughing and your sowing and your weeding, and there's a bit of a space in which you can relax and actually have some fun. Other reason is it's warming up.
Yes.
Around about 1500, ordinary people have a serious shortage of indoor spaces which are warm, where they can gather in large numbers. The church is usually off limits because it's a sacred building, so you can't party in it. But come Whitsun, usually England's warm enough to be able to get outside. And in the open spaces, you can have as many people as you like. The Morris dance is really, really hot and new and exciting around about 1500. It's a courtly dance, and it's leaking out into the villages around the royal palaces. In the original courtly form, it was an elaborate game by which strapping young men competed to show how far they could leap in the air, to dance with and woo a lady.
Well, quite fashionable, though.
Very, very much so, cutting edge. The church initially was rather worried about this development because alcohol plus crowds equals misbehaviour. But then it learned how to cash in. So the church ale was invented, the Whitsun ale, which is this wonderful arrangement whereby people in the village would provide the raw materials for the food and drink. And then the villagers, when all this was ready, would pay an entrance fee. And the church would take the profits to supply its parish needs for the rest of the year. And everybody was happy, and it worked like an absolute dream each year.
This complete intertwining of social life and religious life and economic life is so typical of this period, isn't it? Everything has a religious element to it. It's sort of almost like the air you breathe.
Yeah, and pretty free of tension. On the whole, it had got it right. It had created a perfect medieval society. In many ways, too perfect. People began to worry there might be something wrong in the middle of all this. I mean, you sleep on that for a bit, you get a reformation.
Yes.
So we should enjoy the calm now before the storm begins.
But this is merry England, for heaven's sake, so to speak. Let's enjoy it.
Yes.
Little ones are ready to go, get the boar in, get them pregnant, carry on. I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be a proper treat. That is fantastic, that.
500 years ago, England was emerging into a new era. After years of war, plague and famine, the kingdom was enjoying peace and prosperity under the reign of the first Tudor king, Henry VII. A new class of business-savvy farmer was thriving, boosting food production.
And then over she goes.
While wool from their sheep was generating half the nation's wealth. Many of the nation's farms were under the control of the biggest landowner in England after the king, the monasteries. Their influence could be felt in every aspect of daily life. They were not just places of religion, they were at the forefront of technology, education, and farming. But with the daily lives of monks devoted to prayer, they depended increasingly on tenant farmers who worked and tended their lands.
Steady, girl.
Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to Tudor England, here at Weald Downland in West Sussex, to work as ordinary farmers, under the watchful eye of a monastic landlord.
That's the way. Nice.
To succeed, they'll have to master long-lost farming methods.
Those flanks are going again.
And get to grips with Tudor technology.
Quite noisy.
It's a really violent process.
While immersing themselves in the beliefs, customs, and rituals that shaped the age.
This is merry England, for heaven's sake, so to speak. Let's enjoy it.
This is the untold story of the monastic farms of Tudor England. It's late spring. The team have been running their Tudor farm for 2 months. They've set up a pig enterprise, breeding Tamworths to pay rent to the monastery. Sheared their Southdown sheep and sold the fleeces, a big earner for the monastic farmer. And they've mastered driving oxen, the tractors of the age, to sow a pea crop.
They're fast. They're faster than I thought they'd be.
Now, they're turning their attention to making the staple foods of everyday Tudor life, bread and ale. Records show that it wasn't unusual for a person to consume a £2 loaf and 8 pints of ale a day.
It's amazing how much of the diet bread and beer made up.
Yeah. 80% of Britain's total calorific intake was between bread and beer. You know, grain-based, which is quite... That's just one... Really, it's just one little tiny group of foods providing the main
But it's your carbohydrates,
sustenance.
isn't it? That's your energy to get through the day, doing everything you need to do, and it's going to be cheaper than proteins. There's meant to be the same amount of calories in a pint of beer as half a loaf of bread. So when you think of it like that...
That is a third of your calorie intake, isn't it? Which, when you consider that many people are on the edge and that's pretty much all they're eating, that's an enormous part of the diet.
Tudors drank ale not just for the calories, but because water from wells was often contaminated. The alcohol killed any bacteria, making it safe to drink.
Dietitians sort of analysing this these days would say that the only thing that's missing from this diet is a bit of vitamin C. But it doesn't take much. You only have to have the occasional leaf now and again from something edible, you know, the odd apple, the occasional bit of cabbage, and you've sorted that problem out.
To produce a daily ration of bread and ale, 6 acres of wheat and barley were required per person per year. Failure of these crops could quickly result in famine, and in Tudor England, 1 in 4 harvests failed. People had little understanding of agricultural science, so to ensure a good harvest, they were guided by age-old superstitions. But most of all, they turned to God.
Prosper the work of those who enable us to supply the resources of our small world.
Amen.
Right, onwards and upwards.
It's 40 days after Easter, Rogation Tide, when farm workers processed around their parish boundary, praying for a successful harvest. It was known as beating the bounds. But there was another purpose to this ritual. In 1500, parish maps were virtually non-existent, so beating the bounds reminded everyone of landmarks that divided their parish from the next. Folklore historian Professor Ronald Hutton has come to partake in the ritual.
We have to pass the knowledge down to the younger members of our parish. How do we get these guys to remember?
Here's the bad news. It's a mixture of pain and pleasure to make it memorable. Pain because young boys were regularly beaten or hung up and down by their legs and bounced on the ground. And then when you'd made them remember bitterly what this place was and why it was special, you'd give them treats like cakes afterwards to cheer them up.
Now, young Edmund, come on. Right, this has happened to every parisher, male parisher in the past. They need to remember this tree.
Don't drop it. Look, I'm being dangled upside down.
There's the tree. See the tree?
Oh, yeah.
See the landscape?
Yeah.
Tree. Gonna remember? Yes, that's the right answer.
We think he remembers what's going on. What's the payoff?
The payoff is cake.
Ooh.
It's fruit cake.
That's yummy.
Another generation sorted.
The better-off supplemented their diet of bread and ale with meat. The Tudor age saw tenant farmers begin to breed pigs commercially for the first time.
For farmers under the control of the monasteries, these pigs represented essentially a pig factory. If little ones are ready to go, get the boar in, get them pregnant, carry on. No longer are we subsistence farmers, we're now business farmers.
The farm has 2 sows that will produce around 12 piglets a year between them, a useful addition to the farm's income. The piglets are 10 weeks old and should now be ready to wean from their mothers. Once the sow stops producing milk, she'll be ready to breed again.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, we're good, thanks, Neil. How are you?
All right?
Yeah, not bad.
Right.
How are you?
You ready for it?
Pretty much.
Farmer Neil Careswell is helping the boys lure the piglets away from the sows and into the sty.
The secret to any wean is not to get them too stressed. If we're calm, they'll be calm. Come on. Come this way. Georgie, come on.
Look, it's home.
What's in there?
In.
4 in.
Don't even try and bite
5
me.
in. Oh, 6 in. Yes! 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 6 small pigs in there, 2 big pigs out there.
But their joy is short-lived.
Come on, escapee.
Yeah, you
Oh
stay there.
no, boys!
Our little piglets have found out that they can burrow under our makeshift hurdles. Oh, no, another one. It was close. We almost got there. My mistake entirely.
It's always like this, Peter, and don't worry, it never ever goes to plan. And do you know what? There's always one.
Look, I'll reason with it. Look, look. You're currently marking your cards as the one we're going to eat. You know?
That's not reasoning, that's threatening.
You really want to go in there.
Yeah.
Finally, after much cajoling, the piglets are separated and taken to the woods.
Come on, piggies. Come on, pigs. Come on, pigs.
In Tudor England, piglets were often fattened on common land, in forests. Here they could eat fallen acorns, beech nuts and chestnuts. This ancient rite was known as pannage.
Keep calling. I'm over here.
You're not lost. Tudor farmer putting his pigs in the woods. Not only are you clearing that land out, it's essentially all for free to put on the weight to these guys.
But it's exactly what they need. They'll be up here about, I don't know, 3 months or so.
Yeah.
Get them right up to weight, and they'll absolutely love it. There's loads of things for them to explore. Come on then, guys. Come on.
Come on. Up you go. Come on, greedy pig.
As tenant farmers, Tom, Peter and Ruth would have employed workers to tend to the animals and crops. It was the farmer's duty to accommodate and feed his staff, and the farm would have produced its own bread and ale. Essential to both was yeast. It made the bread rise, and in ale turned sugar to alcohol. It was made by capturing bacteria from the air.
Come to see how my plan to capture some wild yeasts is going, and it looks like I might have some success. The idea is that I'm trying to harvest the wild yeasts that are in the air all the time. I mean, they grow naturally on grain. They also grow on the skins of fruits. And these can start you off in your brewing and your baking. So I've got a bowl of flour and water, and there's tiny, tiny little bubbles, which suggests that fermentation has begun, which means there must be yeast present.
Making money from the pig enterprises relies on a continuous supply of piglets being bred. With the last litter fending for themselves, it's time to reintroduce the boar to the sows.
He is huge.
He is a big boy. He is a big boy. However, he is only 18 months old.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
He looks very different, though. Is he a Tamworth?
No, he's not a Tamworth. He's still a very old English breed.
Yeah.
A breed called Oxford Sandy and Black. Now he's in the pen. You might find there's a bit of scrapping, a bit of fighting going on. It's just them figuring out who's boss. They'll figure out very, very quickly that he's the boss.
And then once these girls are pregnant, it's going to be, what, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days?
It is, yes, it is. Now, she's obviously only just weaned. She'll probably take about 3 to 5 days to come back into heat. And once the boar takes an interest in her, which he certainly will once she comes back into heat, yeah, I think we're looking at not very long. 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days.
Fantastic.
You'll be a proud father.
A farm this size would have employed around 10 workers, together drinking up to 300 gallons of ale a month. The job of producing these vast quantities often fell to women. The raw ingredient was barley. The first stage was to turn starches in the grain into sugar, a process known as malting.
Seeds store their energy through the winter as starch, but come the spring, A new process begins inside the grain, and those starches get transformed into sugars, and it's that sugar we want to capture. So we actually need to start this grain growing, but only just so far, and then we'll kill it and use that sugar to make our beer. But I think we've still got a lump there, look.
You're a perfectionist, aren't you?
I am a perfectionist.
Put me to work here.
Water stimulates growth in the grain.
Having let the grains swell, now what we're trying to do is sort of, I don't know, recreate the conditions of spring. They've got all the water they need, and then they need a little bit of warmth.
Over the next few days, the barley is heaped into a smaller, deeper pile to contain the heat.
And you can feel the warmth in it, can't you? And that smell.
Yeah. Almost like you start thinking now about what you're actually making when you get that really pungent now.
Absolutely.
Making ale was a time-consuming job that had to be fitted around tending to the crops and livestock. Despite this, most Tudor farmers had little real concept of time. They simply worked from dawn till dusk. Life in a Benedictine monastery, however, was based around a strict routine. Tom and Peter have come to meet Abbot Aidan Bellinger to find out how time was managed.
What would a typical day be like for the monks?
Every day of the year, the monks gather and have 7 services during the day and 1 at night. So one would be talking about getting up in the morning as soon as it's light, and then carrying on until dark, and then getting up once during the night for a night prayer, which is the 8th prayer of the day. There would be time for silence, time for reading, time for eating, even time for talking.
So I suppose a time measuring device is actually almost essential.
That's right, yes, because one of the things that St. Benedict says that the abbot has to do is keep everything regular.
To remind monks when to pray, a bell rang out across the monastery, dictating the rhythm of life. Monasteries often had their own foundries where bells were cast. Tom's come to the foundry to help Andrew Lacey make a new bell for the monastery. He begins by making a mould.
First, you've got to design the shape of the bell. So to do that, we cut a shape like this. Okay, so you can see the design of the outside of the bell. Just cut into a piece of wood. Put it onto a blade like this, which is strickle, and you literally get some daub, which is clay and hair and sand, and then just keep swiping around until it makes the right shape.
This forms the inside of the bell. Then Andrew builds up layers of wax, which, when smoothed off with a larger strickle, forms the outside.
So the wax is on top of our initial round of daub. Yep. We're going to put more daub on.
Yep.
So the thickness of the wax is effectively the thickness of our bell. The wax will be melted and replaced by our bronze.
That's exactly it. Everything that's wax now is going to be bronze later. This is the lost wax method, and it's typical of the Tudor period.
The wax is covered in daub, then fired in a kiln. This not only hardens the daub, but it melts away the wax, leaving a bell-shaped cavity.
This is the mould, this is the bell mould, and it's quite a heavy lump. So all the wax that was in there that made up the bell has been drained away. Right. So there's now a cavity where that wax was.
Where our metal will go.
Exactly.
Bell metal, a type of bronze, has been around for over 3,000 years and is an alloy of tin and copper.
What kind of composition are we looking for?
Well, ideally, it's going to be 20% tin, so the rest of it's going to be copper. And when you mix those two together, you get this lovely bronze.
What kind of temperature are we going to get to?
About 1,100.
Serious heat, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I think we're ready to pour. I think we're totally there.
Right.
It's spot on.
Andrew has just one chance to get this right. An air bubble in the bronze will ruin the bell.
Bells were so central to religious life that the abbot would actually come onto monastic land where the bells were being made and bless the kilns. It shows how important these items were.
Yeah. I'm hoping that's perfect. It felt good. When it feels right, it kind of intuitively it is right.
Knowing when to ring the bell was vital. Early medieval monks relied on sundials or water clocks to tell the time. The problem was, someone then had to ring the bell by hand. What was needed was a way of automating the process. And it was in a 13th century monastery that a mechanical clock was invented. Peter's meeting Alan Middleton from the British Horological Institute to see how it worked.
I suppose we take measurement of time very much for granted, but this must have been amazing at the time.
It was an enormous breakthrough, the mechanical clock. Before the Industrial Revolution, clocks were the most complex mechanisms ever made.
But of the time, it would have been miraculous.
Completely miraculous, yes.
The key to the mechanical clock was a device called the foliot. This ensured it ran at a constant rate, so time could be measured reliably.
The foliot is mounted on what's called a staff. The staff has two flags or pallets on it, and as the tooth of the escape wheel drops off one pallet, it lands on the next one, and so it goes backwards and forwards. And this controls the rate at which it unwinds.
If that wasn't there...
The wheels would spin around at high speed and the clock would stop in a couple of minutes. So.
But there was a complication to this system. In monasteries, religious services were split between those observed in hours of light and those during hours of darkness. So day and night had to be divided into 12 hours each, regardless of the season. This meant summer daytime hours would be longer than 60 minutes and nighttime hours shorter. In winter, the reverse was true.
This is the genius of the foliot up here, because you've got these two weights on it here. As you can see, this is for either a long summer's day or a long winter's night. It goes quite slowly.
By moving the weight in towards the centre of the foliot, the clock runs faster, making each passing hour shorter for a winter's day or summer's night.
That is quite a strange concept to me, in terms of you are actually altering your clock in order to delineate time based on the seasons. You're still
doing that, yes.
Quite tied into those seasons.
This is the way in which they operated, and their clocks had to work to that standard.
It's amazing to think that need to regulate prayer throughout the day, the impact that has had on future societies.
It's absolutely crucial. It's one of the greatest machines ever devised.
Peter's installing a mechanical Tudor clock at the monastery to call the monks to prayer.
Oh, wow.
He's setting it up to automatically ring Tom's bell.
But hopefully, it will sound amazing when it's struck. I'm really pleased with this, to be honest.
As this goes round, it's going from the 1 to the 2, then it just kicks the arm down, which rings the bell.
Close to the...
But Peter's installation has disengaged the all-important foliot.
I might be calling, oh no, the monks to pray out a little more often than they want. Calm down, it's very temperamental.
After some adjustments, the clock is running properly.
That's good. This clock is set now to ring 8 times a day, calling the monks to prayer. So 7 times during the daylight hours and once at night. I mean, that is such an important development, isn't it?
But it all started in the monasteries.
Mechanical clocks spread from monasteries to church towers across the nation. And time became fundamental to people's lives. Back on the farm, Ruth's producing ale for the farm workers. The barley's been malting in warm, damp conditions for a week.
Well, it's happened. The barley has sprouted. I need to stop this straight away before it sprouts any more. But the smell has changed too. That is ready for the kiln.
The malting process has turned starch in the grain into sugar. To stop the process, Ruth's heating it in the bread oven.
I haven't got my oven as hot as I would for bread. Don't need that sort of temperature. I just need to dry out the grain, to kill all that shoot.
The sugar-rich barley is ready to be turned into ale.
I'm not making beer, I'm making ale. Beer is technically ale plus hops, and there's going to be no hops involved in this. Beer was a continental, particularly a Dutch thing, that eventually comes over to Britain. But in 1500, almost all of us are completely drinking ale.
Next, the malted barley is boiled in water to release the sugars. Water from wells was often contaminated and dangerous to drink. But this process made it safe.
Now, this has to come up to the boil and then simmer for about half an hour. And this, of course, this boiling is what makes the beer so safe to drink. It's sterilising the water. And then the alcohol that we're going to produce will keep it sterile.
Farmers provided food and drink for their small workforce.
Pop the lid on. Come back in half an hour.
Monasteries, on the other hand, had to cater on a much larger scale, not just to monks, but all the lay folk who worked there. So their brew houses and bakehouses produced vast quantities of ale and bread. Peter's helping out in the monastery's bakehouse. First, he's sourcing the main ingredient, wheat flour.
Hi, Peter, you all right?
This was ground on demand at one of the monastery's mills.
You wouldn't mind just holding that while I shin up?
Rather you than me.
Peter's come to High Salvington Windmill in Sussex, where miller Peter Casebow begins by setting the sails.
Tie on there.
Although this mill dates from the 1750s, it's of similar design to a Tudor mill.
That's it. So we've got it nicely spread, OK?
Yeah.
And that should now catch the wind nicely. The trouble is with the wind is it can be... I've just taken the brake off now, OK? And we lost the wind.
Well, I suppose you're at the mercy of the wind.
We'll have to turn the mill round and see if we can find some wind from a slightly different direction. So what we're going to do now is to lift the steps of the mill.
Right.
So I do that by pulling up this lever, which will do that.
Wow.
And the steps are now clear of the ground.
So this whole building
lot's
is just,
going round.
It's just balancing on a post then? Well,
That's
hence
right.
post mill, I suppose.
We're saying about 26 tonnes, you know.
26 tonnes?
See if we can get a bit more power out of her. She's going quite well now.
She is.
The wheat is carried up to the grindstones by a winch powered by the sails.
Take that off and you can see the stones underneath there. You have one at the bottom called the bedstone, and that's wedged tight into the floor.
So that doesn't move?
So that doesn't move, because there's quite a bit of friction when you're grinding. And then you have the runner stone, which is the one on the top, and that runs over the slight gap above the bedstone.
The surface of a millstone is carved with deep furrows.
Now, the bedstone has them cut in the same as the runner stone. And when they the two come together, you can imagine they act rather like a pair of scissors, and they shear the grain and create the flour that way. It's supposed to be better than, you know, crushed like the modern mills.
A miller was at the mercy of the wind, and so far there hasn't been enough to grind. But Peter's sensed a change in the weather.
Let's get this thing going, shall we?
OK.
Put the brake on.
And that will enable us to then put this in gear.
That's right. OK, here we go. Oh, come on. Is that in?
Yeah, that's
Well
in.
done.
I'm just doing up the sprattle.
Cool. It's actually, you're going to grind. We're going to grind on this. OK, brake's coming off. Yes, she's running. We've got some stuff coming through now.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. Oh, look.
And we'll actually test the quality of the flour by the rule of thumb, OK?
Yeah.
I can tell whether it's the right sort of consistency.
So that's where the saying comes from, the rule of thumb.
Yes. And if it's fine enough, then that's it.
I'm no expert, but it feels fairly fine to me. A little bit of...
It's not too bad.
The odd bit of granular... I mean, it's like a wholemeal, isn't it?
It is wholemeal, yes. As we say, mice and all.
Another commodity required by the monasteries was wax, essential to make church candles. Candles represented the light of God, and those made from beeswax rather than animal fat were particularly special, as they burned with a pure, clean flame. To produce a continuous supply, monasteries kept their own bees. Tom's helping beekeeper Paul Hand harvest the wax, which came with a useful byproduct, honey.
The honey was the only form of intense sweetener that they'd got at those times, but the beeswax is the only form of wax. Today we've got paraffin wax and lots of different kinds of wax, but then for making ink, for lost wax casting, for jewellery, for all sorts of little processes, that was a major industrial product.
You've given me some gear here.
A little bit of protection?
A little bit of protection. This is my my overalls, is it?
So that'll cover everything, including your codpiece, so that'll sort of... And you've got a wicker mask on there, which I'm not sure how much you'll see. But your face is obviously the bit that you want to protect more than anything else. We'll just turn them up gently.
Tudor bees were kept in skeps, upturned wicker baskets.
Oh, I mean, visually, that's amazing.
This was the way bees were kept for over 2,000 years, until the invention of the modern beehive in the 19th century.
You can see they're really quite dark bees, almost you'd say black. But this is the British black bee. This would have been the bee in Tudor times.
All right, so this actually has a heritage.
Oh, definitely. And it was only in Victorian times that people went off to Italy and round on their grand tour and saw the golden bees out there and thought, ooh, we'll have some of those. And then we've got different kinds of bees now. But people are keen to get back to the original Tudor bee because they're very suited to our climate.
The bees build wax honeycomb to contain their larvae and stores of pollen and honey.
That's incredible.
Goose, just to sort of brush them off.
And the goose feather basically is like a very safe way.
Well, a brush, they might get their legs stuck in it, so if it's hairy, this has got nothing to catch for the bees, so we'll pop that on there and let's see if we can get a little bit more.
So why do bees make honey and wax?
Well, this colony and the queen in here, she could live for as long as 9 years. So they've got to have enough stores for the winter. So the honey is their food for the winter. But bees, they're geared to produce lots of honey, and if you give them space, this colony go on and produce maybe 40, 50 pounds of surplus honey in a year.
Once the honeycomb has been extracted, the two products, honey and wax, must be separated.
Just break off the comb and pop that into here, and then you crush that with your hands.
It just runs out.
Yeah.
I just want to taste some.
You can see the little caps on there. That's sealed, proper honey. It's still warm from the hive, and to me, that's the best way to...
That's amazing. My lips have almost stuck together, but...
Because sugar's lovely and sweet, but honey has an amazing flavour with it as well, something really quite magical.
Mm.
It is fairly stunning stuff.
It's so good.
Hi, David. You all right?
Peter's brought the flour to David Carter in the monastic bakehouse, where 3 types of bread were produced. Unleavened communion bread for use in church, fine white bread for the abbot, and masseline bread for the monks and lay people.
Masseline is a derivation of the French masseline, and that means a mixture. And hence what we've got here is a mixture of flours.
To Peter's wheat flour, barley and rye flours are added, then mixed with salt. Salt not only flavours and preserves bread, it works with gluten in the flour to give the dough strength and elasticity.
So pop it into the middle.
To make it rise, they're using Ruth's yeast, produced in the barley field.
In Tudor times, yeast was regarded as something really quite magic. Nobody really understood what it was or why it worked. And in fact, in a book from 1469 called the Brewer's Book, yeast was referred to in a single word, God is good. And it wasn't until the 1800s that yeast was fully understood as an organism on its own.
On the board?
Yep. Length.
Yeast reacts with sugars in the flour to produce carbon dioxide gas. This is trapped in the gluten of the dough, making it expand and rise.
If it fights back, show it who's boss, Peter. You're going to eat the bread's not going to eat you.
The dough is left to rise, or prove, then knocked back to redistribute gas bubbles produced by the yeast.
Just liberally dust the top with a bit of flour. I like that flourish. It's a sign of a good baker, a good flourish. Great. Lovely. 1, 2, 3, out.
After it's proved a second time, it's ready to bake.
Unveil the magnificent loaf. Hey, wow, look at that.
I'll scrape out the oven.
You scrape out the oven. I'll bring the magnificent loaf.
The oven is heated by lighting a wood fire inside. Once it's up to temperature, the fire is scraped out.
Let's get it in the oven.
And the bread bakes using the residual heat.
And we're going to give it a push and a pull.
Oh,
and
nicely done, nicely done. Let me... Oh. Ooh, my feet are hot.
At the farm, Ruth's following an ale-making recipe that goes back to Neolithic times. The malted barley has been boiled to produce a liquid rich in sugars known as wort.
And I can draw this first batch off. So this batch of beer will be the strongest. And once I've drawn all this water off, I'll put another load of water on the same grain and boil it up again. And that will make a much weaker beer. So this is more your sort of evening drinking, getting drunk beer, and the next batch will be your sort of daytime drinking beer when you're thirsty, but you need to still have your wits about you. Now it's time for the flavourings. So in goes my elderflower, and in goes a small amount of honey. Just a little bit. Stir that through. Now, while the beer's still hot like this, flavours of the herbs will be drawn out into the liquor. Now that it's cooled, I'm just straining. Naturally, I don't want any organic matter which would introduce bacteria into the beers.
Finally, ale balm, a yeast, is added to turn the sugar from the malted barley into alcohol.
So a little bit of my ale balm from the last brew into that pot, and the alcohol within the liquid will keep it sterile.
At the monastery, the beeswax has been separated from the honey and melted, ready to make church candles. Paul starts by making the wick.
If you go into church and you're seeing these impressive candles that, you know, don't smell bad, they last. Yeah.
And a beautiful, clean, white light.
Yeah.
I mean, to us they may look slightly, but compared to, say, LEDs or something, but compared to yellowy, sputtery tallow candles, a clean light of a beeswax, so it was very, very clean and very bright.
Yeah.
The wick is repeatedly dipped into the beeswax, slowly building up the layers of the candle.
Is it dripping there?
Yeah.
That will solidify fairly quickly.
And we want it as straight as possible because that's the centre, the core of our candle.
It is, it's the centre, and if it burns off, then it'll drip down the side. So if you get it nice and straight, then you get a nice, clean, even burn. So that's now almost solid. So then we can dip again. Pretty well enough for a light read.
So that'll be good enough for the monastery?
Yeah, I think so. They'd get through a chapter, perhaps.
Finally, the ale is stored in butts, where the sugar will continue to ferment.
Another batch in the butt, in its butt, in the buttery. And that's what this room is for. It's for storing all my ale and everything to do with drinking. So all the jugs and the cups and everything come in here. And then next door is my pantry. And that, of course, is where we store all the bread and things to do with eating, you know, bowls, spoons, napkins, candlesticks, that sort of thing. Together, they form the sort of service end of the house.
Ale brewed with malted barley was drunk by everyone. But the type of bread you ate was determined by social status. At the monastic bakehouse, Peter's making some of the finest quality loaves exclusively for the abbot, manchet bread.
This is going to be made with white flour. It is exactly the same as the wholemeal wheat flour that went into the last loaf, except it's been sieved or bolted. And it was that sieving process that in fact made the flour so expensive, and that is why it became associated with high status.
Now that is so much finer against my fingers. It's like mixing a cloud.
The whole thing about manchet loaves was they were very much lighter, they were greater in volume, they were softer and not as hard to eat as the Maslin loaf.
This time the raising agent is ale balm, the same yeasty foam Ruth used to ferment the ale.
Often the brew house and the bakery were next door to each other because the baker would rely on the brewer to provide him with the balm to make the bread.
It is such a tactile process.
It is such a tactile process.
After proving, the dough is cut into portions for baking.
Do you think this is ready then?
I think so, Pete.
Looking forward to this. This is going to be a proper treat.
Meanwhile, the brown Maslin bread for the ordinary monks has been baking for an hour and should be done.
Oh, that is fantastic. That looks so appetising.
It's a nice, dull, hollow sound. That's definitely baked.
And the baked manchet loaves are ready to be delivered to the abbot.
Fantastic bread. I've managed to stop Tomo eating it on the way.
It looks brilliant. It looks enough for two of us for one meal. Very generous. Looks really good.
Tudors drank ale because water was often contaminated. They also feared washing with water. Instead, grease and sweat were removed from the body with just a dry cloth.
This was an era, after all, in which ordinary people like you and me did not bath. They were scared that if they water washed, that would open up their pores, allowing infection in. And if you lived in a world where the Black Death and the sweating sickness was carrying people off in droves, you too would be pretty scared about undertaking something that exposed you to disease.
Hair, too, was cleaned without water.
You might think that without shampoo, everybody had filthy, disgusting hair. You would be wrong. This is remarkably effective if used regularly, and that's the point. You do have to comb thoroughly twice a day with a very fine-toothed comb. I mean, that side's all very well for getting out the knot, but it's that side that's going to do the cleaning for me. If you were to do absolutely nothing to your hair, if you were just to abandon it for 3 months or so, yeah, the amount of oils it was produced would slow down, but it would smell disgusting because all this dead skin would be trapped, the oils would be trapped next to your scalp. It's not a good place to go. However, if you don't wash it, but you do comb it, you've pretty much solved the problem.
It's early June. Peter and Tom have returned to the farm. In 2 weeks, it will be the summer solstice, the longest day. Hopefully, the boar has done his job and the sows are pregnant. The cereal crops, essential to make bread and ale, are also thriving. But all is not well with the peas.
Something's eating our pea crop.
Pretty much everything's had a bite taken out of it. I think we're talking deer here.
Deer? You don't think rabbit?
Well, probably both.
Before potatoes reached these shores in the 1580s, peas and beans were an important source of carbohydrate and vitamins.
Well, what can we do? I mean, in Tudor times, I think you couldn't really do much. This situation really emphasises the fact that, I mean, you are at the mercy of nature, you are at the mercy of God, and you really have to, there's not much you can do apart from pray.
Tudor trades set up religious guilds to pray for prosperity in business. The team have established their own guild, with St. Benedict, the patron saint of farming, presiding over them. Masses would have been said to pray for special causes, like the success of a crop.
As the service is in Latin, most people couldn't follow word by word what was going on. But if you attend church one day a week, every week of your life, you quickly get an idea of the sort of shape of the service. You know, words you recognise as the cues for when to kneel, when to look up. And you can follow the service in a sort of vague form, even if you don't manage to follow every single word in meaning.
The most solemn part of Mass is Holy Communion. The priest blesses unleavened bread, the host. Medieval Christians believed that this had now transformed it into the body of Christ, a process called transubstantiation. To receive it, you had to be free from sin. Most people felt they were unworthy, so they took blessed ordinary bread, known as panis benedictus. But there was another, more controversial use of the panis benedictus. Records show that some farmers took it from the church and sprinkled it on their crop to ensure a decent harvest.
Accounts at the time thought that this, the panis benedictus, had magical powers. I mean, it could perhaps heal the sick, or it could fend off caterpillars from your garden, or perhaps it could rejuvenate your deer-eaten, rabbit-nibbled, weather-beaten pea crop. Who knows? And as that sun sinks in the west, and there's no more we can do to protect this for another night, I'll take all the help I can get.
Peas were an important food crop, but sheep were the real money spinner for the Tudor farmer.
No. Which one are you going?
Oh, that one. Yep, that one.
Woolen cloth accounted for 75% of England's exports.
Should have had a...
The farm's flock of Southdown sheep have been sheared, and now the boys are giving them a once-over to ensure they're healthy, starting with their feet.
Pack it in!
Right. What I'm trying to do is just where the hoof is starting to fold over, just trying to get rid of that so it doesn't get infected.
Sheep are designed pretty much for living on quite rocky outcrops and nibbling away at the grass that grows there. As soon as you move your sheep into a downland environment like this, they're on quite soft land, so there's nothing to wear away effectively what is their toenails. So this is pretty much a sheep pedicure. Well, if I had a pedicure like this, I'd be demanding my money back. Right, I think it's time to let her go.
OK.
We're going out that way there. Right, candidate number 2.
Oh, this is going to work well for us.
The main purpose of breeding sheep in the 1500s was for wool. But any sheep past their prime would be slaughtered and eaten as mutton.
I'm going to roast the mutton. A bit of a treat, that, rather than boiling it. Naturally, I'm boning it out, which is a much more efficient way of roasting. You can roast with the bone still in, but there are problems with it. If you think, look, there's the shoulder, the bones that I've taken out of the shoulder, and you can see that, you know, that constitutes quite a barrier to heat moving through the meat, which makes roasting it evenly a bit of a challenge. If you take the bones out and roll it into a joint, much easier. And that's why traditionally roast meat is a rolled joint. So what I need to do is turn this into that perfect cylinder of solid meat. Could you give me a hand popping this in the spit? Oh, no. Okie doke. Push up as much as you can. My spit is on my spit dogs in front of my brand irons where the burning brands are. And I've built a fire which is going to give me a sheet of flame in front of which I'm going to be roasting. If you roast over the fire, the fat from the meat drips into the fire, encourages huge, great fat flames to come up and scorch the outside of the meat. So you're going to end up, or there's a strong danger of ending up, with it black on the outside and raw in the middle. Roasting was always considered to be a really luxury method of cooking because it takes so much time, it's so much labour. To put this much meat in a pot and boil it, well, you know, I could put it on and leave it, couldn't I? I could get on with half a dozen other things. But if I'm going to roast meat, I actually have to be here, casting an eye every now and again, giving a little turn. But I also can use that attention, the fact that I need to be here, to add in flavour during the cooking. And this is the thing that really marks out the good roast meat of old Britain.
Ruth's basting the meat alternately with its own fat and dredge. Dredge was breadcrumbs and flour or oatmeal flavoured with spices.
What I should be able to do is build up a really deeply flavoured, crispy coating around the meat.
It's a week since the Guild Mass for the pea crop, and the boys are curious to see whether there's been any improvement.
I have to say that this pea crop is looking, touch wood, pretty fine.
It's looking very healthy. I think the weather's really helped. But
Yeah.
also, it seems like some of the animals that were attacking it when it was sort of weaker, smaller, they've laid off a bit and we've just got this massive growth.
A little secret, I took a piece of the Panis Benedictus from the Mass and I sprinkled it in tiny pieces across the entirety of this crop. And I have to say, it's worked a treat.
Yes, sun and rain might have been in there as well, but good work.
Let us be thankful. Amen.
Amen.
It's 11 in the morning, and the farm workers have assembled for the main meal of the day. Having risen at dawn, this would keep them going until evening, when they would eat just bread and ale.
Not your fault. This mutton is absolutely fantastic.
Oh, I love roast meat.
And here we are at the top of the table.
Head of our household. Good, isn't it? And you'll notice that we haven't got any of the mutton on the other tables.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet, anyway. So it's up to you, really. If you think somebody deserves a slice of meat, then you send it to them. And it's a really public message. Everybody in the room would notice. They'd all know that not only were you giving a reward, but it's a very public reward.
You could also shun someone, couldn't you? You can make a marked statement in another way. That person, but not the person in the middle.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why this whole meal is so formal. This is the sort of central ritual of household. You're making a whole load of social statements, and this daily ritual of dining reinforces all those positions.
I think we need to curry favour with all you guys, to be brutally honest. But in the modern vernacular, I am going to say ladies first. So, Helen, if you fancy coming up, please. Yeah, take the whole lot.
Thank you, thank you. We've obviously been very good, working very hard.
It's Midsummer's Eve. Tomorrow will be the longest day, and the sun will be at its highest point in the sky. For thousands of years, this has been regarded as a special and mystical time. Peter, Ruth and Tom have come to a nearby hill to celebrate. They're joined by people from their parish and folklore expert, Professor Ronald Hutton.
The sun rises and sets at different points in the horizon through the year, which is why days get shorter and longer. But it slows down at midwinter and midsummer, and for a few magical days, it appears to rise and set at the same points in the horizon. So the laws of nature and the divine are suspended. Human beings can become magical. The fairy folk can wander among us. Potential is limitless. Tonight, the last night of the solstice, Midsummer's Eve, you, Tom, can find a fairy mistress. Tonight, Ruth, you could find your divine opposite number. And you, Peter, and I can enjoy a drink.
Fire was at the heart of midsummer celebrations, and jumping through flames was believed to bring good luck.
Ruth, would you do me the honour of leaping the midsummer fire with me? The rest of you will get back a bit.
Goodness.
1, 2, 3.
It was believed that at midsummer, evil spirits roamed free, and fire would ward them off. In truth, it wasn't evil spirits in the air, it was disease.
Back where we are now, the Tudor period. This is the time when fleas breed, and fleas brought bubonic plague. This is the time when mosquitoes breed, and they brought malaria. Lice brought typhus. The corn is growing, it can now be flattened by storms or catch disease. And it's the time when the sea is calm, the rivers are low, the roads are dry, which means that armies and brigands can move easily. We are in danger of being plundered. We're looking at stark, lethal danger, and fire will keep us safe.
There was one fire that was especially effective at warding off evil: the bonfire.
A fire made entirely of bones is a bonfire, from which we get the word bonfire. They smell dreadful, and the pungent smoke drives away evil spirits.
So Peter's convinced, after a few ales, he's actually seen a dragon.
Certainly scare away evil, traditionally. And as for seeing a dragon on some ale, can you hear it? It's a roaring night. Out there in the winds, we hear the voice of the dragons.
As well as warding off evil, fire was also used to predict the farmer's fortune with a burning wheel.
There's moisture in the air and the ground is damp. Do you think this will make it to the bottom of the hill still alight?
I have no idea. No one's done this for decades. So if we want a wonderful summer, get that darn wheel down that hillside.
We need all the luck we can get.
A cartwheel, wrapped in straw, was set alight and rolled down a hill. If it reached the bottom still burning, a good harvest was assured. If not, the crops would fail.
Okay, well... Pick it up, buddy.
Well...
Bloody wheel.
Full marks for trying.
That is what is known as a roaring success.
I think you need a smart lawyer to convince any deity that that was rolling a wheel, but for sheer ingenuity, you are the pride of our species. Yes.
Next time on Tudor Monastery Farm. How monasteries made money beyond farming. From mining lead.
This is hard.
Fishing.
I'll come back in with if it does, I can't!
And running inns for weary travellers.